Welcome to our next Setters Only conversation. This is Scott Rennick. I'm the publisher and the owner of CBJ. And as you guys all know, we work to empower and uplift the professionals in our space. And we're really privileged today to work again. We've been doing this now for years. I say this with Vortex Routesetting, and we're going to have a conversation about route setting. We do these on a monthly basis. So if this is the first one that you're checking out, make sure you go to CBJ or you go to our YouTube, and the full catalog is available. They're all free. We've had a lot of really interesting conversations, but it's a really privilege to work with Justin and Foxman from Vortex. They are, in my mind, some of the people that are really contributing to this sport. They've been a part of the CWA, committees on work at height and route setting for years. They've contributed countless volunteer hours. And they also do this really cool thing. If you go to vortexroutesetting.com, for years they've been collecting data about the workplace for route setters, and lots of different interesting things that they share for free on their site. So if you want to learn a little bit more about what standards are and what other people might be experiencing around their world. So again, and they don't get paid anything for that. So it's just a privilege to work with them here at CBJ, and I'm gonna turn it over to them, and they're gonna take it from here. So thanks, Foxman and Justin.
Thanks. We also should probably introduce our guest today, another Justin. Um, the Arizona native, been setting for about 23 years, currently head route setter at the Boulder Project in Tempe, Arizona. Owns his own business called Planetary Climbing and specializes in designing and building custom rock walls. So thanks for being on, Justin.
Thank you for having me.
So, full disclosure, I usually call Justin Wagner because I do that, and I'll probably do that throughout the call because having two Justins kind of breaks my brain a little bit. But I am so excited to have you here, Wagner. I've had the opportunity to work with Wagner in for a little bit now, and he's amazing. And we had some fun with the social media post for this because we had so many people comment on the social media post, like Arizona natives, because he's the local legend. Also, it is my hobby to make Wagner feel uncomfortable by giving him compliments. But genuinely, I'm so excited to have you here because you're a person that I look up to a lot, particularly around like how you approach the craft of route setting and how you approach our conversation today, the topic today at hand. So yeah, hooray. Um, I'm scrolling
Yes.
through. Yeah.
So the topic for today's conversation is ego, specifically route setter ego, and it's very real. Um, so I think maybe we just kick it off by just defining what the word ego is and just seeing where the conversation goes. You want to take a stab?
I will take a stab. I think the idea of ego, for a lot of people is just like maybe a manifestation of themselves and how they understand themselves in the world, and how it relates to route setting comes in all the ways I'm sure all the people watching have seen in some form or another. But really, there's like an identity that is not just tied to your personal preference or your personal likes, but there's like a value um, that often gets placed on that. And I think it becomes challenging when the value of a route setter in that space gets questioned. So it could be as a leader, it could be as someone looking at a leader, and how your sense of identity gets tied to the work, the creative work that we're all trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective, like tying our ego to our identity, to our work, and the value that we see in ourselves through the work that we produce and other people's reaction to the work that we produce. Um, and figuring out, I think especially for creatives, we put a lot of heart and soul into the things that we are offering to, whatever community we're creating it for. Um, I guess my question would be, do you feel like there is a unique role for how do you think that ego plays a unique role in route setting outside of other creative work, or do you see parallels with other types of creatives and how they interact with their ego?
I mean, I think at least specifically to route setting, it absolutely shows up. Um, and it can be beneficial or it can be detrimental for sure. I think creative people in general identify with how they perceive whatever they're pursuing through their own eyes often. And I guess the kind of the crux of this conversation is trying to figure out how can you separate your personal experience from what you're trying to produce or what you're trying to create. And that that difference in personal perception versus like looking at the work, I think maybe is kind of at like the heart of what we're trying to get at, and how we all envision our role in route setting and the decisions that we make, the choices that we make, the things that we like and that we don't like, can influence the final product. And the question for me is, what does it look like if we remove the route setter and their kind of identity from that question?
Can you speak more to that? Like when you say remove the route setter and their identity from that, what does that mean?
I mean, I think we're jumping ahead a little bit, but
I know, but
we'll go
I
right to
want to know.
curiosity, which is the main point that I think this whole conversation is based around. And I think any route setter that has put holes on the wall, made decisions about adjustments, whether that's in setting or forerunning, can see preferences they may have of their own in that final product. And then at some point we turn it over to the climbers or the competitors or whoever it is, right? And the idea that those people would be able to sort of experience that thing that we've created and express themselves the most fully, to me, feels most authentic if we can remove our work and ourselves in the best way that we can. So to, I guess, like maybe state another way, if the goal is to allow the climbers to express themselves in their most authentic way, how do we kind of get out of the way of that? And of course, we're going to put the holes on the wall. We're going to make a lot of decisions. But ultimately, if the goal is to allow them to experience that for themselves, being able to find a space that is truly centered on somebody else and not as like focused on what I may like or what you may like or what another person on my team may like. And I think it's a very difficult thing to do because I think a lot of our work is so tied to this like emotional connection of the effort that we put in and maybe what we could hope to see from a particular climb or a route or a boulder or a competition result. And it's absolutely challenging to pull ourselves away from that. But if we do, and we can give the space back to climbers, I'm very curious what that looks like, and I'm not sure I found it yet, but that's kind of where my interest is currently.
Yeah, so I think I would love to kind of like dive back into like what ego looks like for a lot of route setters, like young route setters, young how we've each approached ego in our career. Like I can look at how like how my ego has impacted my route setting. I think we can also, I'm gonna throw other Justin under the bus slightly because he and I have talked about this a lot. He was my first mentor. I started route setting with him as my head route setter, and I came through. I came into route setting through classical music, and so um, that impacted my relationship with mentors just generally. But I'm curious, Justin, like what your experience was like growing as a young leader and how you experienced training younger route setters or training ego out of young route setters. And yeah, also just checking real quickly, you've got a lot of static on your end.
Mhm. Is that better?
That is better. Yes.
Cool. It was an air filter. Okay, solved.
Not the air filter.
Uh, okay, so I appreciate that question. I think you can just come out and say it. I feel like I was a tyrant, right? And I think, we all have to learn somehow. I didn't have a ton of mentors kind of like moving up in the world. I feel like I've been route setting a while. I've figured out quite a lot of this myself. And I definitely made a ton of mistakes. Uh, and I'm sure I made many when I was mentoring you, right? And there's like a few stories that I can think of, just like, classic Justin trying to figure out how to be less of a tyrant, but also like I thought I knew what I needed and wanted, and everything had to be in this little box, right? And I learned so much over the years. But I remember a conversation just like with a route setter, just asking very specifically, like very candidly. They set their route, and then I said, like, does this deserve to exist, or something to that effect? And like I remember seeing how that like cut to the core of them, uh, and that was like an immediate like, oh, maybe I should rephrase, like, but because I think that you're right, like we have this vision of like what we want, and a lot of times we think that we might be the best person to produce it, but that's just not realistic. I can't set an entire gym by myself, nor would the members or community want that. Like there's an importance to that variety, there's an importance to that different flavor. And so I think like kind of what you're saying, Justin, is just like uh, allowing there to be that creative freedom. Allow like it has to have guardrails. Like we can't just like all do whatever the heck we want.
I think also like that question of like, does this deserve to live? Like, I like for full clarity, I felt generally I really appreciated your mentorship because you were very direct with me, which like I have since learned I do really well with very direct feedback. And it wasn't always easy to hear, but it like gave me a direction that we needed to go in. Um, but that question of does this deserve to live takes it outside of the person that made it. It's not like, do you deserve to be a route setter? It's like, does this thing that is currently on the wall deserve to exist in the way that it is there? But I think it is very hard for a lot of people to see that distinction of the like, I to this day, like I've been route setting for a minute now, and I've made a lot of things that I'm proud of, and I feel like they introduce people to climbing in a way that like I'm psyched about. Also, I've made a lot of trash, and that's fine. I have enough experience under my belt that like one dumpster fire of a route doesn't define me as a route setter, but that's taken a while to get to of the like this moment in time doesn't mean that I am not worth the work that I'm doing. I don't know, I'm curious, Wagner, like how do you approach that distinction? How do you foster that in a team? How do you
Yeah,
foster that in yourself?
yeah. It's a great question and great point. I think for me, the foundation of a conversation like that has to start with trust. And before, at least in my experience, before you can have a conversation about the idea on the wall, um, you have to know that your team, and from your team's perspective, that your leader is genuinely committed to you as a route setter, right? So creating an environment where those people feel fully free to express themselves, not worrying in the back of their mind that if I say or let's just back up. Like if they propose an idea on the wall, that they're going to be criticized for that just because the holds are there. And knowing that the space is comfortable and accessible and truly defined by finding the best version of every idea that gets produced, irrelevant of who made it or who put it on the wall, and that regardless of how good or bad the idea is, at the end of the day, the entire team, including the leader, will like rally around that thing and just focus on that idea. And I think at that moment, there's both detachment of we're going to start at the beginning with just the thing that gets put on the wall, and also from the person that you're interacting with or that is on your team, you're saying to them right from the beginning, I have your back. It doesn't matter what the day brings. We're going to figure this out and we're going to solve it. And I think, at least in my experience, having that foundation built well means that people are more likely to just be open. I've seen plenty of instances where an idea goes up and the setter is guarded or worried, and that we could tie it back to ego of like, is this going to affect me? Will this reflect on me poorly? Is the head route setter or the chief of this event going to think that I am, incompetent, or, any number of things? And at least establishing from the beginning that that's not what we're doing. We're not judging the individual route setters. We're not judging the people on the team. We're really just trying to find the best version of our climbing in that moment. And I think if that foundation is laid, and then you say, does this idea deserve to live? Then I think the answer is a very clear, like addressing of just that thing on the wall. It's much harder to take it personally if you know that you're supported and you know that you're in a place where you have a team of people that will kind of follow up with you and not make it personal, right? And not,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about kind of that same question with what you just said, Wagner, of the does it deserve to live? And like pivoting what we're talking about into that concept of curiosity, where something that I've been really focused on lately, as I've been teaching a lot of clinics, a lot of certification clinics, but also just within route setting, this concept of there's so many right answers, and maybe I'm wrong, right? Like I'm pretty sure that I know the things I know. But if I approach a new thing with the like, maybe I'm wrong, and be curious about that, like genuinely exploring it, the worst case scenario is I learn something new, but that doesn't really seem like a worst case scenario. Like maybe the worst case is I was right all along and I got confirmation that I was right. Like I don't know. And so it seems like if we're able to foster that environment where the trust is there to ask, does this deserve to live? Is this boulder going to function the way that we think it's going to? Can we poke at it a little bit with some scientific method and try to break it? It becomes less of a personal attack and it becomes a question where we're all trying to figure out more about this thing and we're approaching it with an open-mindedness and a curiosity that benefits everybody, including the boulder, and then of course the community that will climb on the boulder. And I don't know. I've found this a difficult thing to communicate to other people because I do feel like there is frequently a reticence to be open to just being wrong. And I don't know. And it's something like route setting. I feel like we're very rarely like, what is wrong? Like, sometimes there's a wrong, but there's so many right answers. Maybe ours isn't the answer that get picked today, but how do you communicate that to a team? How do you foster that inquisitiveness?
I think for me in that scenario, the worst case is that the team doesn't feel supported, or an individual route setter doesn't feel supported. So to me, that would be like an ultimate failure, that they don't, that this environment that would hopefully foster creativity has like somehow broken down. Outside of that, the worst, though, and I'll put it in like big air quotes, the worst case scenario is that we take an idea down. And we might do that because it just isn't the right time, the right day, the right moment, the right circuit for that idea. And we'll maybe bring it back another time, maybe we won't. But at least in relation to failure, for me, failure would just be if someone was like unwilling to pursue what that best idea could be. And if we don't find it and we take it down, that's not failing. That's actually doing the ultimate thing that I think we're trying to do. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but at least we tried. And at least we held all of the things that we believe in at our core. And if that meant that one boulder doesn't exist at the end of the day, like, but we learned something and we took something away from that, it was really valuable, then there's no part of failure for me in that. I guess more of a tangible experience of like fostering inquisitiveness or that like desire to kind of probe at an idea. One of the things that we'll talk about when we transition from setting to forerunning is so we put an idea up on the wall. There are many things, and all the route setters have an idea of what might happen on that boulder, or maybe they don't, and that's even better. But when we get into forerunning and climbing, the goal should be approach this thing in front of you as a rock climber, just as a climber, with no preconceptions of a sequence or an identity. And it goes back to the thing that at least for me, drew me into climbing, which was you don't know what's going on. You don't know what you're about to expect, but you get drawn in for some reason and it becomes an obsession, right? And that creativity and openness and lack of constraint allows you to just experience the thing that is in front of you, and hopefully then in that experience find the best version of the climb that you would like to present to all of your members. And there are plenty of times that we may have one idea on the wall and the route setter could have a sequence or kind of like a core idea, but in climbing it and approaching it as just a rock climber, seeing what they can do in their creativity, find something completely different. And at least for me, when I see that happen, I won't waste a second to pivot to that new idea. And if it means rebuilding the entire thing, but the idea that we're pursuing is ultimately the best version of whatever we're trying, it doesn't concern me in the least bit. And when I will like debrief with a route setter about like, oh, your original idea changed quite a bit, right? I've had people say like, they felt a sense of failure, or maybe they missed the mark, or they're worried that, they didn't present something that was what the final form was. To me, the thing that we discovered is only possible because of their input. The holds that they chose, the way they oriented volumes on the wall, the conversations that we've had on the mat, all of those things contribute to whatever the final version is. And kind of closing the loop at the end of the day to say, yes, I know you had this in mind, but these are the things that you did that contributed to this other thing that is amazing. And it wouldn't exist without you, right? Like your input at the beginning of the day and then throughout the process is the reason that this final version exists.
I kind of love that. And I think I'm just reflecting on sort of some of my processes on teams that I've worked with. And one of the things that I actually love doing, I think, thinking about how route setters transition from route setting to forerunning. Usually there's a lunch involved, so there's almost like this like hard reset, right? You can kind of like reframe. Um, and when we approach climbing, I often encourage my team to like not climb their climbs, right? First, and just like encourage other people to just experience it however they want with like no preconceived information or or sort of guidance, because I think sometimes we can get into a trap of like, oh, I know that this person wants this move to happen, and then we are maybe blinded to this alternative pathway that like might already exist in a stronger way that in some ways might be cooler or different or unique. So I think that sometimes works. I think with like the dynamic between route setters, either peer to peer or whether it be a conversation with a head route setter or whatever, I think it's really important to like have a level of transparency, genuineness, and vulnerability. I think it means a lot when the head route setter or whoever is in charge like flops or fails or right like and owns it, right? It's like, yeah, we all, as Fox says, we all put up trash, right? Like, and we all can learn from it, and it's the team's sort of vision and direction that helps it become something new. And time is always the enemy, right? Like at the end of the day, whether it be 4 o'clock or whenever your setting shift ends, like the work zone has to open up, the community has to be able to get access to it, and there's only so much time, and so we have to like make strategic decisions in that amount of time to like guide the process forward. And that can be really hard. And I think those debriefs are amazing because those can happen off the floor, and you can like have that opportunity for growth or reflection, or whatever it might be. Yeah, I love that.
The conversation has kind of made me think. I feel like there's no, there's way more than two, but these kind of two diverging models where I know that I've gone to events and the success of a route setter is usually based off the percentage their skeleton is done, how many tweaks it took to get it to where it needs to be. And there's something like so fundamentally different between like, a championship level event where like time is the enemy, yada, 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 and a commercial space where you do have time. And I'm curious, do you reconcile those two models in like how you approach your mentorship of younger setters? How do you reconcile them if you do? And how do you set setters up for success in whatever field they go into? If it is a competition scene, if it's a different commercial scene than where you are, how do you foster that kind of intrinsic curiosity so that people can succeed wherever they are?
Yeah, it's great. I think how do you create
Sorry.
success? No, I mean, how do you create success with a time constraint? And I'll just say, for me, the constraint of time, it's very real. I think it is for most route setters, right? Like to Justin's point, like you have to open the zone. And I would say even now in this kind of current climbing scene environment, I think a lot of route setters probably operate in places where there are very few constraints. You have an immense amount of resource. You have whether it's volumes or holds or new things coming in, and but time is the ultimate one. And I think it's very important to like focus back on that because it generates decision making. We need to open for customers. We need to do those things. I'm not particularly involved in the competition scene. I've set a handful of them. And there's certainly value there. For me, at least, I'm attempting with my team to pursue this kind of question of what does it mean to remove ourselves from that. So I'm probably not the best person to speak to like what does it mean when you're setting semifinals and you get, some bomb dropped on you. You need to complete by this time and finish and get a result and do those things. Because at least in my environment, if something isn't working, we'll just take it down and we'll have a conversation about it. Flag it for later, maybe. But it's not, if it doesn't meet the standards, then it doesn't exist anymore. And that's the end of that. And I think from the beginning, as we discussed, like with that trust building and then pursuing those ideas, if something comes off the wall, it's not a reflection of the person that put it there. And taking those learnings of like pursuing that best idea and making sure that the route setter who is involved in that in any way, whether it's just coming across it in forerunning or they were the one that had the initial setting idea, making sure to include them in the conversation so that they don't feel like something's being changed without their input or their understanding. Maybe the best version is just very clear and we circle back with the person at the end of the day. I would imagine, just based on my experience, that having those conversations would prepare you to then just pursue those ideas and be very open to the feedback that you receive. So if you are on a competition setting crew and the chief or some other route setter comes up to you and gets on your boulder and says, hey, I think we should go in this direction, it's not going to be foreign. You're going to say, like, I've seen this before. I feel right at home. I'm aligned with you in this direction that we're going. And so, like, let's take everything down and rebuild it. I have definitely seen that not happen when it should have. And kind of going back to this, original, like, kind of key point of the conversation, maybe it's tied to ego. Maybe it's tied to your personal idea of what should exist. Or maybe you just feel like you're pursuing the best goals and the other person that you're working with just like doesn't get it. Right. And like that's a reality in route setting. And you have to be able to kind of adjust what you're doing and the work that you're doing to the environment that you're in. And if that's just a sit down conversation with that setter, like you step away from the wall and you're just like, hey, like, can we just kind of like see eye to eye and sort this out? If it's bad enough, do you go to the chief? Whatever it is, or if you're the chief and you see that happening, like, do you step in? Do you jump in to say, hey, this is what I'm observing. Give me your experience, whatever it is. And, how do you prepare someone for that? I think you make it intrinsic to the process would be my answer. That's
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can speak to, and this is a place where, like, I know that I still struggle with ego, like in some spaces where it can be difficult for me to tell if my feedback is being uh, accepted or rejected based on my climbing level, which has never been the highest. Like, I have never been the strongest climber, and there are spaces where I have been made to feel that my input is valuable, even though I don't climb as hard as everybody else. And I know that the team trusts me and trusts my feedback. And so if it is ignored, I can be like, cool, they don't need it. They've got this, like, we're going to make a different decision, and that is fine. And if the feedback is ignored, but I suspect that it's just because I didn't pull as hard, then it can be difficult to convey my thoughts in a way that doesn't get read as defensive because of my ego, even when I'm trying to give suggestions based on what I think is for the best, like, decision of the climb. And that's a really tricky space to navigate. I have no clear answers. Like if I can't do the move and somebody else does, like there is a very real conversation for like, well, I didn't do it. So like maybe my opinion is not as valuable, but I've definitely worked on teams where I didn't feel it in that specific way. And I think that kind of circles back to that level of trust that we started the conversation at, where if a setter feels trusted for their expertise, just like as themselves, it is easier to let go of the ego that can be tied with the perception of themselves via this boulder, or in my case, via my climbing ability. Um, I don't know. If there were an easy solution, I would hope that we would have found it, but I would love to find it because I I personally hate that that moment of like, how do I navigate this so it doesn't come across as defensive? Because I don't want to feel defensive, but I also know that I am a little defensive. But then I don't want, like, I just want to find the best solution. So how do we just like let it go, you know?
There's so much nuance to all these conversations, and there's so much subtext. And I think you nailed it. It's like, what's the dynamic on the team, right?
Mhm.
Are these people that you work with every day and have had like a long time to be able to develop that rapport? And it's like ride or die, or is it like a crew that you're working on the first time and you're just like a little unsure, and you are you reading too much into this, or where are we all coming from? And I think that in some ways over communicating can help in those situations, but also again back to time. And depending on which brain you're trying to over communicate with, that might actually not be the right tactic, and so it can be really difficult. This conversation is making me think about like how my tactics have shifted over the years. For like, you've got like baby Routesetter who may or may not have ego challenge, right? Like I think it really depends. Like sometimes I don't want to like stereotype. You've got like Routesetter A who comes in and just like thinks they're hot shit, and they put up something that's like maybe trash, and they're gonna die on that hill that it's the best thing, that it's like God's gift to route setting. And then there's like person B who might come in with the same amount of experience level and put something on the wall, and they actually think it's trash, and it's actually maybe great. And like, how do you like react to both of those two situations? I know like past Justin has done many of the like classic clinic situation where it's just like, oh, I want you to set this boulder knowing the whole time that I'm just going to have them strip it regardless, just to kind of like break down those walls. And that works on some, and it actually doesn't on others, right? I also think about how many gyms now are moving away from like putting route setter information in a public facing way. So maybe I know that Foxman set this boulder, but unless Foxman tells someone that they set that boulder, maybe there's no like front facing tag that says that you are the creator of it. Like it is the product of the team, as you were.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm curious what other tactics you both have kind of played with.
Well, to go back to the kind of one of the first things you said, I think there is a difference between a crew that you're used to, that you're familiar with, there's a rapport built, versus walking in day one to like a championship level event, right? But even with the crew that you're familiar with, sometimes people just have a bad day, and the way they show up is very unexpected or very different. And at least in my role as a head Routesetter, or if I were a chief of an event, I think it's incumbent on me to adjust my perspective despite knowing this person, because how that Routesetter will show up could be different just today, maybe tomorrow, but it will be different just because life changes, right? So it's like, it's not certain how things work. Kind of going from
There,
there. Huh?
that makes me want to work every event with you because I definitely worked an event where like everything in my personal life was like on, like literally there was a fire that I could see out my window, and it was a championship level event, and like I couldn't be my best self. I really wanted to, but I like couldn't. And I'm like, man, if every manager or chief had that like level of understanding that like somebody might not show up in the way, like, ah, that sounds great.
Well, and I mean, that's very real, right? Like people show up in different ways every single day, and I think that there are also tactics to figure out, like, maybe you don't have the best rapport, maybe it's a new employee or staff member, or it's that crew mentality where it's the first time you're meeting with someone. Like how do you parse that? um like there has to be a trust build for them to even like maybe come to the table to share that there's something going on in their life, or they didn't sleep last night, or whatever it is. um, and so I feel like this conversation is making me think about some of the tactics that like teams that I've worked with have shared. Things like just like I forget what it's called. I think it's like it comes from the first responders. It's something called the Responder Alliance. I think is something that basically it's like a color coded where you at chart. It's like, am I in the green? I'm like good to go. Yellow, orange, red is like everything's on fire. And usually people are somewhere in that spectrum. So whether it's like an anonymous kind of like slap a colored sticky note on the set shop door, or like maybe there's a magnet, or I don't know, like Google spreadsheet, whatever. I find that if there's buy-in to like have, whether it be, shared or anonymous reporting, that can really kind of set the tone. Or maybe it's just like pulling someone aside and be like, hey, listen, this is the deal. But I think that there's got to be a way to kind of like assess in real time where your team is at. And then if everyone's like in the orange, like maybe you're not going to be like, guess what? We're going to set this crazy comp today. It's like, okay, let's wait. Let's get people in the green. Let's figure out what's going on. And then let's roll out this new initiative or adjust whatever it is.
Yeah. No, that's very true. I think having a good read on the pulse of everybody that you're working with is ideal. It's very challenging sometimes. I think for me, I would say that like I've experienced, even working with other people who are in leadership roles, there's just kind of a natural approach from, let's say, the setting team to whoever is in charge, that person is kind of guiding this entire process, right? And when you see vulnerability or openness or curiosity from that person right at the beginning, I think it goes a very long way to set the tone for everything that comes next, right? So in my case, if I was leading a set day or I was chiefing an event, if I had a finger injury or I slept really poorly or I had something going on in my personal life, and maybe I don't want to share the details, but I can just be open about that. Hey, I'm not showing up at 100%. Today, I'm like 75, maybe less, right? My expectation for you all are these things, and just communicate very clearly. But knowing that your leader, the person who's kind of guiding things, is willing to be open about something in their own life, I've seen go a very long way in establishing that trust, like going back, like, is this a place where we can like really be open with the goal of like, how do we take all of this, that all of these personal issues, all of our feelings and thoughts and all of that, and just like push it to the side. And I think maybe the only way to do that is if we feel like we're genuinely connected and feel like a team.
100%. Like thinking back on that exact event that I referenced, I found out afterwards that one of the senior outsetters who I was like working with, and I found out afterwards that they also were like dealing with a bunch of stuff. And I think if I had known that at the start of the week, and it's hard because you can't ask people to necessarily communicate with the same level of vulnerability that you're communicating with. But I know in the middle of the event, I was like doing my best to just like hold my professional stuff together and like not let it get to me. And I think if I had known that somebody else wasn't showing up at 100% too, and they were also trying, even without knowing details, it would have made a huge difference. It's like, okay, we're in this together. we're just trying to get this thing on the wall, and we're going to do the best that we can do. And I think it would have helped a lot. Like it helped even finding out afterwards. I was like, oh, okay. So like all of the feelings that I had, it wasn't just me that was like in the moment. We were all in our own moment together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, for me, this sparks two ideas, which is one, go back to like a mantra of what is the best version of the thing? Like, if we're going to kind of zoom out of finding like a tangible aspect to setting and a connection here, and asking what is the best version of this idea isn't asking who put it on the wall, why did they do that, how were they showing up that day when they put it on the wall, anything like that. We're just looking at that. And then if you pair that with kind of your like first principle ideas of what you're trying to accomplish, whether it's competition and you need to get a result because that's the job that you've been tasked with, or if you're just trying to pursue climbing and setting in a particular way, putting those things together just doesn't remove it. It doesn't involve the person who put the thing on the wall and how they showed up, but your team is supporting them so they feel good, and they're showing up then as a setter, a forerunner, like a co-author in this thing. And at the same time, the climbing that we're trying to create is going the direction that it ought to be, because it's guided by these like fundamental principles. And Justin, to one of the questions that was buried in there, in authorship, right? Of like, if I could erase the authorship of specific boulders that I have to log, I would, because it's not representative, and it centers a person. I would say, one, it centers a person in an idea that I don't want a particular person centered in, right? Because we're just pursuing this climbing idea. And also, I've seen the criticism that comes in from like a climbing community affect that person very intimately. And then you show up the next setting day and you're like, okay, we're going to pursue this creative act, and we're going to like try to find the best thing that we can, and we want to divorce ourselves from this idea that we're attached to it, and we want to climb and show up as creatives. And then that person is actually thinking like, well, I just read a comment on social media that said I'm terrible at what I do, and I've internalized that, and I feel really bad, and all the creative bubble that should be expanding is just like contracting, right? And they say, I'm not good at this thing, whatever. And all of that is tied to how we show up. But all of us have worked in an environment where one person puts on an idea on the wall and 5 other people influence the direction. And the idea that one person is tied to an authorship of that seems kind of ridiculous to me, as like it is genuinely the team that is getting that idea from the beginning to opening and letting climbers experience it.
I think it's worth mentioning too, like talking about how comments can affect somebody. You cited a negative comment, and I've seen the opposite also be true, where somebody gets a lot of positive feedback and then can no longer be a participating member of that team effort, where they get a lot of positive feedback from, the community, and they're like, well, I'm doing the most of the work here. I set up the coolest boulders, and everybody likes me the most. And like, it's a really unfortunate thing, but I think it does still happen. And so I think that concept of centering the boulder as the product and protecting the team from the effects of negative commentary on their creative output, and then protecting the team from the negative effects of like that ego inflation when you do have those moments of being like, I'm so great at this, because I think there's people that can take that input and then continue to try to improve. And I've also encountered people who take that input and they're like, I did it. I'm doing great. And that feeling of success is such a strange thing, because it can be, I'm trying to find the right word, but like it's like it can be a spark to inspire more creativity. If they're like, oh man, I did a thing and I want to do more that makes people happy. And it also can be something that shuts people down to hearing other people's feedback. Um, and I feel like I just started a brand new topic, like kind of near the end of a thing, but also I think it's worth saying. So then I said it. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
I love that and appreciate that. I think I really the term co-author really resonates with me, because like ultimately that's sort of what we're doing. We are collaborators. And yeah, I've weighed the pros and cons of whether names are on route tags or not. And, regardless of what position I'm in or what gym I'm in at this moment, like I do think it's an interesting question and probably a dialogue that we could spend many, many hours talking about, because there are definitely pros and cons, balancing that ego, balancing that like dopamine hit when someone's like psyched about the route that I put on the wall, with the one that says that it's trash, and the percentage of those two things and how they balance and how it affects morale or um, whatnot. I don't know, but I think it all ties back to ego.
And I think if the ultimate goal is to pursue an idea that is divorced from any particular route center that we all agree to as a team, then the individual person, this, it could sound callous, but it doesn't matter, right? Like, yes, on the team, you matter immensely. But towards the idea and the pursuit of that, we're not talking about who did what. That's not the thing that we're focused on. And ultimately, like, going back to like the beginning of this conversation, if the goal is to create the best experience for a climber coming across something that we've created, the idea that like we've created it is, I think, even worth examining. Because if we can build or construct a space where that climber can express themselves the most fully, the curiosity question for me is, what does it look like if we fully remove the route setters, or the most fully? And that means rejecting bias or as much input as we can, and we build a stage where these climbers can then be their most authentic version of themselves while they experience this, and find the most joy that is the most representative of themselves as climbers. And because we're all different, and that will show up in so many different ways, what does it look like to like truly step back, right? And like allow those people to just kind of be their most authentic self. And it could be a day of the gym. It could be a competition. I mean, I know we can all think of athletes that just won't conform to what the route setters are putting on the wall, right? And you can have route setters that are like, why don't you just jump? Why don't you do this? But that person is so like clear to their identity, and they won't do that. And maybe it affects the result, maybe it doesn't, whatever. But if we assume that we can guide that process, then we're putting ourselves into that. And I think the question that I'm most interested in is like, what does that look like if we step away?
I like that a lot. Wagner, you're good at words.
I try.
Oh, shoot. Well, we're coming up on quite an hour of full-on chatting, but it seems like we should check in and see like if there's anything that you want to that we didn't touch on that you want to like explore or parting thoughts or yeah, yeah, both Justins.
I think in the main, kind of thesis of the conversation of being curious, for me, when I found climbing, the big question was, how does this work? And my background and where I came from, the thing that drew me into it was trying to solve that problem for myself. How does this work? How does my body fit into a space? How do I get stronger? How do I understand this like chunk of rock, whatever it is? Um, and I think if I could encourage people to pursue something there, it's just to remain open to challenge the things that you think you know. Um, Maybe to take the things that you think you know and push them aside and try something different. And talk to other people. Be open. Be willing to like see things from a different perspective. Whether that's climbing, whether that's how you organize a day, if you're in charge of a team, how you interact with the team, and making sure that like in that pursuit you center people first so that you can pursue the best idea later.
I like that a lot. Other
No
Justin.
notes. Nope,
No
no
notes.
notes.
Well,
Yeah, I think the best way to maybe do some of that is to get out of your own little island. If you've got like if you go to the same gym every single day, it it's hard to have that differing perspective. It's not impossible, but I think the growth opportunities that I were given or found uh, often came from getting out of my own little shell and going to a new operation and seeing something, whether it's better or worse, it's just different. And it challenged that line of thought and encouraged me to try to grow or take something back for my team or what have you.
yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I had so much fun chatting with you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Full disclosure, I'm showing the whole world this puppy because I've had a little puppy in my lap the whole time. Surprise! Nobody knew, but now you do. So I had a great conversation with friends and I had a little puppy, and hopefully we solved all of the problems of ego and route setting today. It's done, guys. We did it.
We'll see.